nganggo Zoom meeting, mau orang nganggo bisa pakai lagi. Teknisi mana? Teknisi siapa? Teknisinya siapa? Mas Arif, saya mau ngeling ini kok nggak sambung. Nah iya, nggak sambung, kok harus pakai ini. Nah makanya itu kok pakai itu. Ini sudah jam 9 ini. Oh, udah masuk. Makasih.
Nanti di mute ya.
Tadi Profesor Dr. Rafik Karnsidi. Profesor Dr. Rafik Karnsidi. Ini sudah bisa dimulai. good morning for all participants. We are about to start in a moment. Please be ready. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Waalaikumsalam.
May peace be upon us. The Honorable Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, Profesor Dr. Margono, M.Hum, M.A. The keynote speaker, staff of Coordinating Minister for Human Development and Culture of the Republic of Indonesia, Professor Dr. Rafik Karnsidi, MS. The invited speakers, Professor Dr. Margono, M.Hum, M.A. from Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, Dr. Christian Kamphuis from University of Munster, Germany, Professor Sida Chandra, PhD, from Michigan State University, Deans, Vice Deans, Head of Department, Faculty of Social Sciences, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, presenters and participants from P3SI, Perkumpulan Prodi Pendidikan Sejarah se-Indonesia, and all participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, praise be to God, the one Almighty who has given us His blessing and guidance, so we could participate in the first annual conference on research, educational implementation, social studies, and history on future teaching and learning, a disruptive innovation for the development of civilization, organized by Department of History Education, Faculty of Social Sciences, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, August 25 and 26, 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the agenda, please be silent for a moment to have a prayer. Let's say our prayer, shall we? Thank you. Singing the national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will be a welcoming speech that will be delivered by the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, Dr. Suhardi Purwantoro, MSc. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first annual conference on research, educational implementation, social studies and history, the first AREISSH on future teaching and learning. Disruptive innovation had by the History Education Study Program of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta. The Honorable Keynote Speaker, Professor Dr. Rafik Karnsidi, from the Ministry of Coordinating Ministry for Human Development and Cultural Affairs. The invited speakers, Professor Sidat Chandra. Good morning, Professor Sidat, from Michigan State University. Dr. Christine Kampusch, from University of Münster, Germany, and Professor Dr. Margana from Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta. Terima kasih Bapak Profesor Margana datang untuk menjadi pembicara, sekaligus nanti akan membuka. We would like to thank you for your willingness to speak at the AREISSH. Also, we thank to our friend, many dean who come in this moment from UBSI, UPSI, Professor Hairi, and some staff head of department and some professor and lecturers, and some dean from Indonesia, from UPI, UNP, UNJ, Ibu Dr. Siti Fatimah hadir tampaknya, Ibu Dr. Umasih juga hadir, Dekan yang lalu hadir, kemudian Pak Agus Mulyana hadir apa enggak nih? And the chairperson of the Indonesian Association of History Education Study Program P3SI, Bapak Dr. Abdul Syukur M. Hum. Selamat datang Bapak Abdul Syukur. Terima kasih. And then Coordinator of History Education Study Program, all of from UNJ or out of UNJ. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and all seminar participants, the seminar is participated by 86 presenters and more than how much right now come to this 280, more than 280 participants, and about 70% consists of professors and lecturers, students, practitioners, and we do via Zoom and YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about life may deal with the story of mankind, both the history of good and bad aspect of human. We as civilized humans are expected to take lesson and should not ignore the story. Thus, it is hoped that we can be wise human beings with noble character. In fact, many of us are reluctant to learn from history, which may lead to war, power struggles, and the like. This occurs due to the greedy. If 6 people are well treated, they will be healthy. If uneducated people are educated, they can be smart. If poor people are willing to work hard, they can be rich. But greedy people cannot be cured. Greedy people like Hitler, Mussolini, Idi Amin, and etc. may cause havoc or disaster. Several time ago, I was asked to give a preface to a book compiled by history students related to the infectious diseases, especially in Yogyakarta, including the Spanish flu pandemic that hit Yogyakarta in 1919. If we learn a lot about the history of infectious disease, the flu, we will definitely be careful to deal with it. Hopefully, the seminar really provides insight to the participants and contribute to stop the rampant COVID-19. We ask your apology for any inconvenience in organizing the seminar. That is all of I want, and in this conference, I want Vice Rector, mewakili Bapak Rektor, to open the conference. Thank you very much.
Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Now we invite the Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, to give a speech, at the end of which we kindly request the Vice Rector to officially declare the International Conference open. Straight afterward, Professor Dr. Margono M.Hum M.A. The floor is yours.
Thank you. His Excellency Keynote Speaker, Professor Dr. Muhajir Effendi MAB, Minister of Coordinating for Human Development and Cultural Affairs, Republic of Indonesia, in this occasion represented by Professor Dr. Rafik Karnsidi, MS, the special experts of Ministry of Coordinating for Human Development and Cultural Affairs, Republic of Indonesia, the Senior Rector of Universitas 11 Maret, distinguished invited speakers from SIDAT, Professor Siddharth Chandra, PhD, School of Social Studies from Mexican State University of USA, Dr. Keaton Campus from University of Münster, Germany, Head of Indonesia's Associations of History Education Study Programs, Dr. Abdul Sukur, MSc, Dear Vice Rector for Planning and Collaboration of Yogyakarta State University, Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences, Associate Professor Dr. Suhadi Purwantoro, MSc, and other deans from other universities such as UPI, UNG, and others, Vice Deans, Head and Secretary of History Education's Department, coordinators of study programs, or lecturers and students, the chairpersons of the conference committee, distinguished speakers, presenters, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam.
Good morning. May peace and God's blessings be upon all of us. First of all, let us thank Allah, the Almighty, for blessing and for granting all means and opportunities together here to attend this very fruitful and tremendous occasions of the first international conference on research, educational implementation, social studies, and history, as abbreviated AREISSH, and the first National Congress of History Education Study Programs in 2021 through a virtual mode due to the COVID-19 pandemic, hosted by History Education Study Program of Faculty and of Social Sciences, Universitas Yogyakarta, in collaborations of the Indonesia's Association of History Education Study Programs. It is greatly honored and pleased for me, representing Rector of Yogyakarta State University, Professor Dr. Sumaryanto MKes, to warmly welcome all of you in this virtual conference. Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is evident that the COVID-19 pandemic has spread with alarming speed, infecting millions of people around the world, increasing the death rate of people and bringing economic activity to near standstill as countries impose tight restrictions, including to Jakarta, on movement to minimize and halt or stop the spread of a virus Delta variants, which is very, very dangerous for us. With regard to this, the policy of Yogyakarta State University takes a platform of a virtual mode to hold the international conference as what we utilize today on the grounds that health and safety among us should become the main priority. In reference to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, education sector in particular, there must be a policy of total reformation in some fields. In the education field, for example, it is evident that the education process at schools and colleges, which was formerly carried out via face-to-face, has nowadays turned into virtual face-to-face learning mode with the utilizations of various platforms such as Google Meet, Zoom, and the like. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the practices of research and development in many aspects, which should be delayed due to the risk of COVID-19 transmission, particularly Delta variant. As the result, a lot of output of research and development practices could not be optimally gained. To cope with the above problems, freedom of learning has been an important issue nowadays as a result of, among other, societal development and the surging needs for an outline learning. An essential attribute of freedom of learning is the availability of choices among learners. Choices could be in the forms of different modes of learning, paces of learning, and even amount of assistance provided for the learners. Freedom in this case, however, should be able to empower not only students, but also teachers and lecturers. With regard to the above issue, history as part of social sciences serve as the objects of the historical studies as mentioned by the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, which include humans who are bound with the dimensions of space and time. This confirms that history is part of science that is tied in human life. Therefore, various policies taken by the government in the COVID-19 pandemic must also be reviewed from the past historical experience with adjustments to the conditions of the era. Moreover, historical experience indeed provides an idea that humans are always innovating to solve the problems that they face, especially policies related to education and learning. In reference to the above issues, History Education Study Program of Faculty of Social Sciences, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, is keen on responding to the existing problems. That is why the theme of this conference today deals with future teaching and learning, a disruptive innovation. It is aimed at providing a forum for lecturers, researchers, teachers, stakeholders, practitioners, and students to intensively share ideas and experience under the topic mentioned, to find some solutions to learning and teaching problems in the current era of disruption and to make a collaboration across institutions and countries. In addition, this conference attempts to seek out the solutions and innovations from various perspectives, which include social, historical, and educational ones. Distinguished invited speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, to gain the objectives of this conference, the committee has succeeded in inviting some prominent experts as the keynote speaker and the plenary speakers from different countries, namely Professor Dr. Muhajir Effendi MAP in this occasion, represented by the special experts, Bapak Rector Senior UNS, Professor Sidat Chandra, PhD, School of Social Studies from Mexican State University of USA, Dr. Curtin Campus from University of Münster, Germany, and I myself, as Vice Rector for Academic Affairs at Jakarta State University, Indonesia. In this opportunity, I would like to warmly express many thanks to them all. Added to this, it is unwise not to appreciate all delegates and participants who have managed to take part in this 2 days conference through virtual mode. I do hope that this conference brings some benefits to all the participants and contribute to the upbringing of the scientific life. Finally, I do apologize for any shortcomings which you may find during this conference. I wish you gain a fruitful and pleasant forum and enjoy yourself during this virtual conference from beginning to the end. With the great word of Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, it is a pleasure for me to declare the official opening of the first international conference on research, educational, implementation, and social studies and history, as abbreviated AREISSH, in 2021. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving to the plenary session. The 3 outstanding speakers, Professor Dr. Margana M.Hum, M.A. from Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, Dr. Kirsten Kamphuis from University of Münster, Germany, Professor Sidat Chandra, PhD, from Michigan State University, will be presenting their ideas during today's plenary session. This session will be chaired by Adi Cilik Pirawan, PhD. Now, please welcome Adi Cilik Pirawan, PhD.
Bismillah. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, Your Excellencies and distinguished guests and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to warm welcome to all of you at this first annual conference on research, educational implementation, and social studies and history in 2020 and 2021. And first of all, let's say thanks to and we will invite our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Rafik Karnsidi, to give a speech, and we will be happy to have him as the keynote speaker for today's conference. The time is yours, Prof. Rafik Karnsidi. Monggo, Prof.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Let me introduce myself. My name is Rafik Karnsidi, special staff of the coordinating Ministry of Human Development and Cultural Affairs. Let me represent Mr. Minister Professor Muhajir Effendi, give speech about the material that have been prepared by him. Mr. Minister has an urgent occasion today, so he assigned me to share about his main thoughts here. Also, Mr. Minister send apology to all of us not able to attend in person at this event, and extend his greeting especially to Pak Rektor, represented by Pak Vice Rector, Professor Margono, is my friend, yeah. Also to the committee and all of the participants. So let me read his keynote speaker. Yeah. First, I would like to say good morning and warm welcome to all of you. Yeah. The Honorable Mr. Rector of Yogyakarta State University, represented by Vice Rector Academic Affairs, Professor Dr. Margono M.Hum, all of the Dean from Indonesia, especially the Dean of Social Sciences of Yogyakarta State University, also the speaker from University of Münster, Germany, also from Michigan State University, and also from Yogyakarta State University.
Mohon maaf, Pak Rektor Senior, masih mute?
Mute.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry. Ya. Oke. Sudah, Mas. Oke. Ya. Okay. I would like let me introduce myself. I am Rafik Karnsidi, special staff of the coordinating Ministry for Human Development and Cultural Affairs. Let me represent Mr. Minister to give speech about the material that have been prepared by him. Mr. Minister has an urgent occasion today, so he assigned me to share about his main thoughts. Yeah. Also, Mr. Minister sent apology for not able to attend in person at this event, and he extend his greeting especially to Mr. Rector of UNJ, represented by Vice Rector Academic Affairs, Professor Dr. Margono M.Hum, also the committee and all of the participants. Let me read his keynote speaker. Yeah. First of all, we say good morning and warm welcome to all of you. The Honorable, the Rector of Yogyakarta State University, all of Dean from Indonesia, and especially Dean of Social Sciences of Yogyakarta State University, all of the speakers from University of Münster, Germany, from Michigan State University, USA, and from Yogyakarta State University, also Dr. Abdul Syukur, head of P3SI, and all of the members from all of Indonesia. Allow me to express my gratitude to the State University of Yogyakarta and other parties for their excellent initiative to organize the international conference, the first annual conference on research, implementation, education, social justice, and history. And also thank you for inviting me to deliver a keynote speech on this conference. Distinguished participants, we all know that Indonesian government is focusing on the development of human resources. The aim is to produce Indonesian talents who are the human capital that are professional, productive, innovative, able to compete and have Indonesian nationalism. Anda tayangkan, Dik. Toward 100 years of Indonesian independence, the President want the Indonesian be ready to face globalization challenges. The development of Indonesian talent hopefully will increase national competitiveness and promote economic growth. The future of human resources development is very related to technology, especially technology development, also digitalization, innovation, and particularly the use of information communication technology we call ICT. The ICT mastery will give us an access to and exploit various global data and information. The digital technology and ICT mastery are the main human capital investment for Indonesia to face to the dynamic global challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has suffered the world for more than a year and a half. The global life has changed instantly due to the pandemic. It is the first time a pandemic spread rapidly and extensively in the modern history. Therefore, our response to the pandemic are mostly unprecedented. We have to be adaptive under uncertainty circumstances at the level of individual, community, and national level. According to the Indonesian Statistics Agency or BPS data, pandemic has causes the increasing in poverty rate. It's shown that the pandemic has set the poverty in Indonesia back to the 2018 level, 2 years before the pandemic. The data released February 2021 show that 19.1 million workforces are affected by the pandemic. The number of unemployment increasing because the businesses bankruptcy and temporary market closure. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, after the first case of COVID-19 have been found in Indonesia on early March 2020, the government has ordered the closure for all schools and universities. The conventional learning method, we call face-to-face, has transformed suddenly into distance learning method, mainly the online learning method or digital method. Whether ready or not, learning process is forced to adopt the digital technology. The electronic learning is supported by the presence of the Industry 4.0 technology. This distance learning method is the best choice available during the pandemic. Triggered by the outbreak, school and communities innovate creative solutions to support online learning method, such as development of the wide area or internet network and combining the face-to-face and online learning. We understand that online learning method has many obstructions, both in the technology and the social economy aspect. Some students and educators have the same situation in this regard. For example, the unavailability of the gadget and the lack of money for internet expenses. In other words, the pandemics increased the education gap among communities in the society. Additionally, the learning progress during pandemic couldn't be as optimal as normal situation without the pandemic. Therefore, our major concern not that we are facing the learning loss generation. COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the presence of 4.0 technology earlier than we expected. The 4.0 technology, which is marked by the use of artificial intelligence, automation, and the big data, will disrupt or make fundamental change in the aspect of life. Recently, there are so many human positions have been replaced by digital technology and artificial intelligence.
Ada yang tanya lagi nih ya, Geca mau tanya juga di Sigma itu kita ngapain aja ya?
For example, some jobs have been replaced by smart robot and machine. Success the competition in the era, everyone must complete themselves with soft skill, knowledge, hard skill, attitude, and value. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk about the human capital development challenges. Referring Indonesian Statistics Agency or BPS data, in February 2021, almost 90% of workforce in Indonesia are only high school graduates and under. If we look deeper into the data, approximately 53% of workforce are elementary school graduate of even lower, and they are mostly at age of 40 years and above. The domination of unskilled and poorly educated workforce will weaken the nation competitiveness and productivity. Human resources development is linked tightly with education, especially the higher education. But Indonesian higher education has a major limitation, which is lack of access. Recently, gross participation rate of higher education, we call angka partisipasi kasar perguruan tinggi, as low as 30.85%. Meanwhile, there are approximately 3.8 million students graduate from high school every year. The enrollment capacity of higher education is only 50% of that amount, which means that another 50% should become job seeker. We expect to increase the gross participation rate of higher education to achieve the goal. The enrollment capacity need to be increased up to 5.2 million students compared to the capacity in 2019. The expansion of enrollment capacity in higher education can only be reached through collaboration between government and private universities. Therefore, I expect that private and state universities would continually develop the creativity and innovation to produce excellent graduates in this very tough situation. However, we have to be distinguished case. Let me restate that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a global crisis and also causes a great lockdown, which lead to be global economic recession, including in Indonesia. Whether we are ready or not, this pandemic has prompted rapid structural changes in the sector. The pandemic has created, we call, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity environments. There are positive impacts related to the COVID-19 pandemic, is that the industry sector is pushed to accelerate the digitalization in the production process. The workers should be adaptive in the new nature of work and should improve the competencies. This pandemic situation also creates business opportunity for entrepreneurs by creating innovative way to meet the market demand. Supported by the 4.0 technology, 83% of company will transform the job model into remote work. 84% for the company will apply the digitalization technology, and 55% of work will shift into automation. This condition will reduce the portion of workforce in Indonesia. Now and next slide. However, following the 4.0 technology era, 97 million new jobs will also emerge during the next 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to describe the most essential concept of the human resources development. In this concept, next day. the development of human resources must be done by implementing an integrated, comprehensive intervention of human capital life cycle. And it is a long life process. To summarize the intervention program, the life cycle be divided into 5 phases, namely pregnancy to early childhood. The second, basic education age. The third, higher education age. Fourth, the workforce and family. And the last, elderly. In the first phase, the intervention program is to provide nutrition package for pregnant women and children under 5 years of age, revitalize posyandu, we call integrated community-based health services. For instance, using dana desa in Indonesia, we have the government budget allocated for villages. Yeah. And the first 1,000 days of the life program. These interventions are part of the stunting prevention program, the national action plan of the holistic integrated approach of early childhood education, we call PAUD HI, holistic integrative, yeah. And also concerning strengthening character education. In the second phase, Indonesian government is fostering the basic education equity access through government program, namely KIP, we call Kartu Indonesia Pintar, BOS, ya, bantuan operasional sekolah, the improvement of the teacher and lecture quality, the equity of school quality and the curriculum improvement, revitalization of SMK atau vocational high school, as well as certification and accreditation for SMK. And the third phase, Indonesian government attempt to foster the equity of access of higher education through KIP Kuliah, Kartu Indonesia Pintar Kuliah, and LPDP. It is the scholarship for the student. Also, revitalization of vocational higher education through the development of 500 new polytechnics in Indonesia. The fourth phase, Indonesian government provide job seeker training program using the pre-employment card, we call Kartu Prakerja, and premarital guidance program, and also family guidance program, bimbingan perkawinan, we call bimbingan perkawinan. And the fifth phase, government provide intervention program including health, protection, convenience and security for the elderly welfare. This is the cycle of the human development culture life. Yeah. I would like to emphasize the premarital guidance program. The controversy of this program at the time was caused by the misguiding point of view on this program the last time. In fact, in this premarital guidance program, someone who is going into marriage is guided to comprehend their knowledge and responsibility as a parent candidate. they need to know the health of reproductive organ and nutrition so that they can give birth the healthy and smart children. They should understand the importance of the 1,000 days of life. They should be aware that the parents are the most responsible for the character formation and mental development of their children in the crucial period from birth until up to 5 years of age. Through the program of the premarital guidance, bimbingan perkawinan, the prospective parents are expected to deliberate reduce the number of stunting and build the well-being family. The well-being families will form a strong society. Stunting is a serious problem in Indonesia. Children who are stunted in their childhood will find it difficult to instill character, absorb of knowledge and skill as provision to become a high quality human resources. It will be even worse if the parents are not aware of the unable to get out of the socioeconomic condition since the child was born. Without adequate intervention, these children will potentially become low-quality human resources so that their productivity and competitiveness will be low. Excellent Indonesian human resources, not only the professional and competitive, but also must have an Indonesian personality and always implement the value of Pancasila into the social life. The Indonesian personality is friendly, polite, tolerant, religious nation, and also cooperative. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Pancasila as national spirit and character must really be embedded in every Indonesian citizen. Then I would like to emphasize once more that we are now facing the globalization and we have no other choice but to improve the competitiveness of Indonesian human capital for time being. The nation that will survive will win and be success in the globalization. Let me once again, this is the very, very important, the Pancasila as a national spirit and character must really be embedded in every Indonesian citizen. That is my speak. Thank you for your attention. Once again for me, thank you for your kind attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Coordinating Minister for Human Development and Culture Republik Indonesia, Muhajir Effendi. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Prof. Rafik Karnsidi, for giving us the speech and also give some policies and recommendation and the planned future plan about the national human development improvement. And thank you. I think Prof. Rafik will still stay here, or after this still join the...
Information. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. My regard for you all. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Terima kasih, Prof. Prof. Rafik. Okay. I think we will continue our discussion, and in this conference, actually, we will deal with at least two important questions and intriguing questions. At least how to deal with how we learn from the past experience, and also how we deal with the nowadays problem. And this in this conference we will discuss those two questions, and we are happy, we are lucky now we have three different distinguished speakers. The first one is Prof. Margana from Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, and the second one is Dr. Kirsten Kamphuis from University of Munster, and also the third one, Professor Siddharth Chandra from Michigan State University. Before we go to the speech of the speaker from the speakers, let me say about the rule of the discussion. For the plenary session, we will have three speakers. We will give 30 minutes for each speaker, and after that, continue with the second speaker and the third speaker. And the last session will be the question and answer session. I think I would like to invite Professor Margana. Professor Margana is a Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, and he is actually my inspiring teacher at that time when I entered to UNY, and also he is a mastermind of Merdeka Belajar at UNY. When we adopt Merdeka Belajar, and UNY have progress, quite very good progress in adopting Merdeka Belajar, and he will talk about teaching and also some learning environment, especially during pandemic. Without further ado, I think I will invite Professor Margana. Professor Margana, time is yours.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Good morning. The honorable invited speakers, especially Bapak Professor Rafik Karnsidi, as the special staff, the participants of this conference, and ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to share ideas under the theme mentioned. I do hope that all of the participants could mute the speakers in order that there is no voice coming when someone is speaking. Secondly, I would like to say thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Bapak Adi Cilek, PhD, not junior, but very talented lecturer, who has experience in managing the collaboration, particularly international collaboration. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, in this opportunity, let me share some ideas concerned with the utagogy of in the Let me say first, can you see my slide, ladies and gentlemen? In this opportunity, I would like to present Utagoji-based paradigm for education quality improvement, as presented by the Minister of Coordinating Human Resources and Culture, represented by Senior Rector of UNS and Special Staff, Pak Professor Dr. Rafik Karnsidi. It is a time for us to have a metamorphosis from pedagogy to utagogy. Moreover, we are now in the COVID-19. We have to force ourselves to own growth mindset, not fixed mindset. At least we have to transform from linear thinking to lateral or even radiant thinking, so that we could become agile people who are able to adjust in any situation, including the COVID-19, which is very, very haunted, very, very dangerous. It's not only for the economic development, but also education and other fields. In reference to this, let us think the bonus of demography that will happen in 2035, in which a great number of population in Indonesia is categorized as productive ones, meaning that they are very, very talented, very qualified to compete with other populations across countries. In reference to this, of course, we should equip our students with 21st century essential skills, embodying learning and innovations for CIS, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, innovation, communication, collaboration. Added to this, we also equip the students with digital literacy, information literacy, media literacy, ICT literacy, literacy for human beings, or literacy of humans, literacy of technology, literacy of data. Also, as lecturers, as teachers, we have to equip ourselves and students to have flexibility and adaptability, initiative, self-direction, social and cross-cultural interaction as part of human literacy, productivity and accountability, and also leadership and responsibility should be part of our soul. To be agile people, to establish, to generate agile graduates across universities and across educational level, so that the students will have 7 C's, 3 arms, and 3 M's. I believe that if the students own 7 C's, 3 arms, and 3 M's, they will be agile people, enabling them to adjust at any situations. They will be creative in nature, innovative. They can face any problems that they encounter at any situations. In reference to this, we have to accentuate on the 4 pillars as stated by UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, learning to live together. Habluminallah, habluminana, sabluminalam should be part of our souls, so that we can do our job professionally. This refers to the essence of education that embodies three aspects or three dimensions, namely transfer of knowledge, transfer of skills, and transfer of attitude. This suggests that as lecturers, we do not only stress on the knowledge itself, but we have to make balance between three dimensions of education, the aspects of education, namely knowledge, skills, and values, characters, as mentioned by special staff, Prof. Rafik. That is why when we are involved in teaching learning practices at schools, at universities level, at least we have to think three dimensions here, namely the input, process, and output. Directly or indirectly, those three dimensions will affect the outcome, which is very useful for a great number of people. Curriculum, core subjects as manifested, and the input, learning environment, and others, then the process stress on the instruction, assuming that the students are not the object of change, but we have to assume that students are the agents of change, the subjects of change, not the objects of change, because they come to the world with special abundance of talented dimensions that they have. And then output, we have to give an emphasis on the learning, innovation, forces, media, technology, life, and career, as presented by our minister. Let me quote the statements by Alvin Toffler. The illiterate of 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn to learn, learn to unlearn, and learn to relearn. This suggests that the combinations of the three aspects of the 21st century, namely driving students to learn to learn, learn to learn, learn to unlearn, giving freedom to the students to find out any resources to strengthen their understanding should become our paradigm, namely learn to unlearn. And they have to reflect what they have learned. So learn to relearn as the essence of history. So the three dimensions of learn to learn, learn to unlearn, learn to relearn should be part of our paradigm when we are involved in the teaching learning processes as lecturers, as students, and students as the teachers. The following present the process of unlearning by having intense and real experience that is found in the society, and then sharing, realization, reflection, and impact, review of the transfer of learning at workplaces. That is why freedom to learn, as launched by the Ministry of Education and Culture, Research and Technology, is a good platform to provide students to learn the ecosystem, the exact ecosystem. So after they graduate from the university or schools, they know what they are going to do, why they are going to do, how they are going to do, what for they are going to do. So metaphonic transfer to personal and professional life here, link and match, action plan by participants should be part of our mind when we deal with teaching learning processes. Self-awareness, acceptance, transformations, and performance should be part of our dimensions of thinking to generate agile professional graduates. Added to this, we have to realize that every student is individual in nature. They can be categorized as fast learners, moderate learners, slow learners, etc. That is why as professional lecturers and teachers, we should be aware of those different learning needs at different times. We have to drive any information material that we prepare, that we develop in the long-term memory, which is manifested in two types of knowledge, namely declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. So we have to be aware that the process of memory in a brain consists of two issues. The first is short-term memory and long-term memory. Our job as professional lecturers and teachers should accommodate students in order that they could lateralize any information, any materials that we have. That is why balancing the functions of left and right brain should be part of our paradigm when we develop teaching kids and then media, etc. Because the balance of left and right brain accommodation will drive students to put it in long-term memory. Contextuals, meaningful materials should paradigm when we are going to do with teaching learning process. We realize that now we come to the Industrial Revolution 4.0, which is characterized by artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, virtual reality, and then Internet of People, big data, and the like. Of course, as teachers, students, lecturers, we should aware of those aspects of Industrial Revolution 4.0. But we have to be careful in order that we could manage the product, the innovations of the Industrial Revolution, establish Society 5.0. In reference to this, the education paradigm should be changed from now, because there is a big change in the paradigm of education from pedagogy, andragogy, and then eutagogy, pedagogy, and cybergogy. So in the following, present the issue of paradigm shift. It's not wise to think that the students come to the world with no special knowledge, with blank brain. So we have to accommodate students to be self-determined learning by having personalized learning, digitalized classroom, as mentioned by the previous presentation, smart technology, augmented virtual reality, and then artificial intelligence and the like. Those are becoming the characteristics of smart educations or educations 4.0. That is why the three goji, pedagogy, pedagogy, cybergogy, should become our new paradigm in the COVID-19 and the 21st century. Because the collaborations of pedagogy, pedagogy, cybergogy will drive students to be self-determined learning. We are, as lecturers, teachers, we have a jobs to facilitate them to do with self-determined learning. What is meant by pedagogy here? It is aimed at encouraging learners to become more self-directed, self-determined learner. Pedagogy focuses on co-learning or co-creating interactions between students and students, student teachers, students and the materials, and the like. So we have to establish, if we are going to establish the betterments of education, trigogy, hetagogy, pedagogy, cybergogy should become the new paradigm. What is hetagogy? Hetagogy is defined as the study of self-determined learning and applies a holistic approach to developing learner capabilities, not competencies, but learner capabilities, with the learning serving as the major agent in their own learning, which occurs as a result of personal experience, as stated by Hayes and Kenyon. Hayes and Kenyon 2013 highlights the essence of heutagogy is that in some learning situations, the focus should be on what and how the learner wants to learn, not on what is to be taught. This is the maturity of the difference between pedagogy, andragogy, and heutagogy, because heutagogy gives an emphasis on realizations of the information that they get from different resources. So we should apply what we call heutagogic design, embodying some steps, exploring, creating, collaborating, connecting, reflecting, and sharing. I believe that with the use of heutagogic design, the students will be talented, will be qualified, competitive, innovative, and the like, so that they can compete with others with the use of heutagogy, pedagogy, and cybergogy paradigms. As mentioned earlier, pedagogy is concerned with peer learning and peer production, which are probably as old as humanity itself, but they take on new importance in the digital age. While cybergogy deals with a descriptive label for the strategies for creating engaged learning online, as mentioned by the previous presentation. Creating learner-centered, not lecturer-centered, being autonomous and collaborative virtual learning environment should be established by lecturers, teachers, and the like. The following present the difference between the andragogy paradigm and heutagogy paradigm, given emphasis on process rather than content focused, learner directed, not learner coordinated. When we have paradigm of heutagogy, we create double loop learning, not linear learning, not single loop learning. We develop capability, not competency. So the heutagogy paradigm could generate professional, qualified, and agile graduates. The following deals with the single loop learning, and the other one is double loop learning, because I have very limited time, governing variables, action strategies, consequences. So there are three dimensions of double loop learning as mentioned earlier. If the consequences, the outcomes do not conform to the intention, the actors should also examine their governing variables. However, to show many force us to rethink and change our theory in use. And then added to this, when we are concerned with teaching learning process to make the betterments of our education, we do not give an emphasis on surface learning, but we have to give an emphasis on deep learning, because we drive our students to do with active and long-term engagement with tasks, self-assessments of learning, stimulating and considerate teaching through which relevance and meaning are clarified and emphasized, and other aspects or characteristics of deep learning. So we have to foster, to create the education practices, teaching learning practices with the utilizations of deep learning rather than surface learning. Why? Because deep learning is equal to lateralization. long-term
ngomong gitu.
memory, not short-term memory. There are a great number of approaches, methods that we can apply.
Serasa
For
tak
example,
kabel,
discovery
tekan
learning, project-based learning,
Tak gelem
problem-based learning, inquiry learning, independent project for history students, etc. So you may select the appropriate methods of teaching and learning, which is sound benign for the background of the students. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you very much for your attention. I do hope that it can be a part of our soul to make the betterment of our education in Indonesia due to COVID-19. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Margana, which this is a timely topic actually that we will adopt actually in the near future, I think, when you will adopt this method and also approach for our learning. And this is actually some points that we can learn from Prof. Margana, that we can have some new approaches that we can apply at least for our classroom or our teaching environment, or also learning environment. And this is a very again, thank you very much for this once again inspiring talk, and then we can adopt this to some extent to our environment. And I will invite for the second speaker, because we will have a question and answer later after the three speakers. I will invite Dr. Kirsten Kamphuis. Can I check? I think Dr. Kirsten Kamphuis, before we... Oh, Prof. Okay, I think we change the schedule, and Prof. Siddharth, Pak Siddharth. Yeah, I think I can see. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pak Adi Chilek.
Before, yeah. I think I will. Yeah, and thank you, and this. Thank you very much because you allocate the time, and then this is almost 11 o'clock Michigan time, right? Yeah. And
sekarang jam setengah 12.
Jam setengah 12. Okay, jam setengah 12. Yeah. And then
almost the middle of the night. So so thank you very much, Pa Adi Chilek.
Yeah.
And it is a real honor to be here among this group.
Yeah.
For my presentation, I would like to thank and recognize my hosts from Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta.
Yeah.
Bapa Professor Dr. Margana, Vice Rector for Academic Affairs at UNY.
Thank you.
Also representing Bapa Rector Professor Dr. Sumaryanto from UNY. Dr. Professor Suhadi Purvantara, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at UNY. Also, in addition to my host, of course, Pa Adi Chilek, lecturer at UNY. Also, Papa Rafik Karnsidi, who's representing Professor Dr. Muhajir Effendi, Manko PMK, and himself. Thank you for a very interesting talk. And I think in absentia, my fellow panelist, Dr. Kirsten Kamphuis, who hopefully will join us shortly. So to give you a little bit of background, I'm an economist by training. I also do research on epidemiology. I've been doing research on pandemics for the last about 10 or 11 years. My research started with the 1918 influenza pandemic. I was doing it at a time when most people probably were not aware of it. It used to be known as the forgotten pandemic. Today, I think it's safe to say it's no longer a forgotten pandemic. So what my presentation is going to focus on is some lessons we can learn from the 1918 pandemic that potentially most of you who have a training in the social sciences, maybe in history or geography or sociology, but who are also interested in education in the classroom, to give you a few ideas about how maybe some of these topics from history can be brought into the present. And then I would be very glad, of course, to be involved in the conversation after this panel about how we are using technology in the age of COVID to try to overcome some of the hurdles that the current pandemic has placed in the field of education. So let me start by sharing my screen. Okay. So I think I'm at the end of the presentation here. So let's go to the beginning. The topic of my presentation is the role of history education for understanding pandemics, past, present, and unfortunately future, because I think it's almost certain that we are going to face pandemics in the future. The aims of this presentation are to demonstrate the importance of history in understanding pandemics. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a historical case, the 1918 influenza pandemic, as a way to understand the present COVID-19 pandemic and possible future infectious disease pandemic. And what I hope to illustrate is there are opportunities for educators to use this case and comparisons with the current COVID-19 pandemic in the disciplines of history, geography, sociology, and I'm specifically going to focus on demography, which is a major field within sociology, public health, and perhaps many, many other fields. In fact, I will make some references to law and to literature as well in the Indonesian context. So when we think about the 1918 influenza pandemic, some very famous epidemiologists called it the mother of all pandemics. And the reason they called it the mother of all pandemics is after 1918, after the influenza of 1918, the world was actually visited by a number of successive influenza pandemics. And in all of those cases, actually the ones I'm talking about, in all of those cases, the virus that caused those pandemics was actually a descendant, a keturunan, if you will, of the original virus that caused the 1918 pandemic. But other scholars, until the year 2020, were also calling this pandemic the forgotten pandemic. And that is because it seems like sometime during the early to mid 20th century, people forgot that this pandemic even happened. Today, of course, it's no longer the forgotten pandemic. It was a global pandemic. In different parts of the world, we saw 1, 2, 3, or 4 waves of infection and death. I think everybody is now familiar with the term waves. We are seeing them around the world and they're coming and going. The global death toll is estimated to have been about 50 million. The population loss in Java alone, in a paper that we published in the journal Population Studies, we estimated it was probably in the range of 4 million. So this was a very, very destructive pandemic, the 1918 pandemic. So when we think about history and history education, what are some of the themes that we can bring out when we think about the 1918 pandemic? Well, one of them is the colonial context, right? Indonesia was still the Netherlands East Indies at the time. They had a health infrastructure, but actually the 1918 pandemic was one of the major reasons that the Dutch East Indies authorities invested in the health infrastructure. That was the epidemic that gave them the kind of lesson that they need to invest more heavily in public health infrastructure. Society at the time was stratified. It was a 3-tier society. For those of you who know history, I think there are many of you here. They had the Europeanen, they had the Vreemdosterlingen, and then they had the inlanders. And so the inlanders were actually at the bottom of this racial hierarchy in the Dutch East Indies. They also tended to be, on average, among the poorest people in Indonesia, including in Java. And as a consequence, there was a lot of malnutrition. And one of the very interesting things we know about the 1918 pandemic is people with worse nutrition were much more likely to get severely ill and die from influenza than people who had better nutrition. This, by the way, is a very important topic today during the COVID-19 pandemic. Socioeconomic status and health outcomes. And we're seeing it around the world. A second theme is the scientific context. In 1918, most people didn't even know what was causing influenza. There was a big argument. Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? Is it something else? Okay. As a result, people did not understand very well how the disease spread. They were able to observe that when people come into close contact, there's a greater likelihood that they will get sick, but they didn't know much more. And if they didn't know what was causing the disease, the influenza, there was no question of developing a vaccine. Okay? Today, we live in a very different world. And I think one of the very interesting themes that you can bring out as a history educator is think about the context in 1918, think about the context today and how different it is, and what does that mean for our understanding of how we are negotiating the current pandemic. A third and very important topic in history is connectivity. Indonesia is an archipelagic state, right? If you want to get to Indonesia in 1918, if you wanted to get to Indonesia, you probably had to catch a ship. Today, you don't need, right? So when we look at the history of the 1918 influenza pandemic in Indonesia, it came to Indonesia through ports in Sumatra and in Java at different times. Okay, let me illustrate some of what we see in the area of unequal outcomes. So let me maybe take a pen, and I think I'll use a different color from red. Maybe, how about green? Okay. Now, if you look at the first column, this is mortality in Amsterdam, which was kind of part of the colonial power that ruled Indonesia, which had a population of 600,000 people. And if we look at influenza mortality in Amsterdam, okay, it was relatively low compared to Magelang. So what I'm doing is here, I found a report from the Dutch East Indies from Magelang, now Kabupaten, in those days the residency. There was a health officer, P.B. van Steenis, who wrote a report on the influenza in Magelang. And one of the things he noticed is if you looked at people who lived in Magelang, mostly from Java, and you looked at people who lived in Amsterdam, Indonesia was much more severely affected from the 1918 influenza compared to the Netherlands. Okay? And some of this, in my opinion, had to do with the nutritional status of people in Java at the time. Okay? So it's almost, in some cases, it's almost 10 times as bad in Java as it is in Amsterdam. And if you look at one kecamatan, or the equivalent of a kecamatan in those days, they call it sub-districts, it's even worse. If you look at Krasak, if anybody from here is from Magelang or even from the Yogyakarta region, you probably know where Krasak is, right? Very, very severely affected. Okay? So this is a very interesting theme that I think people can bring up when they talk about the 1918 influenza, and perhaps when they talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. So one of the themes I mentioned is how did the influenza come to Indonesia? Well, one of the first recorded instances was in Sumatra Utara, near the area of Medan, slightly south of Medan. There were ships coming across the Strait of Malacca from Malaysia, in those days British Malaya, it was a colony too, and these ships brought the influenza to Indonesia from Malaysia, which got it from Europe, from Britain. If we look at Java, how did it enter Java? It entered Java from the north coast. The north coast of Java is the main shipping area, as you know, even today. The major ports are in the north. The major points of entry were Jakarta, in those days known as Batavia, and Semarang, both major trading cities. This is a set of 4 maps. These show the status of the influenza in different locations in Java at different times in 1918. Okay? So if you look at October 1918, Jakarta and the Semarang area, more on the side of Kudus and Japara and Rembang, these areas are beginning to peak. What happens after that? The disease starts spreading in those regions. Following that, it begins to go towards the south and the center of Java. And finally, it goes to the more remote areas. Okay? So for those of you who know the geography of Java and where people live and where the ships come, I think this will be self-evident. But it's nevertheless a very interesting way, I think, of thinking about what happened then and thinking about what is happening now. Today we have aeroplanes. We have planes landing all over Java. What does that mean for the spread of the pandemic? So what are the questions you can ask in relation to COVID? Has the pandemic affected different people, maybe in economic status or other criteria differently? Has nutrition played a role in COVID-19 outcomes? How does this compare with the 1918 pandemic? How has the presence of a vaccine, which we have today, changed the ways in which we manage the pandemic? And so on. So there are many interesting questions I think we can ask. Okay. A second theme, Adi Chilek, I asked him what is the profile of the people who will attend the conference. He indicated that there will be some historians, there will be people who have an interest in geography and the social sciences. So one of the things we can think about is geography. Did the 1918 influenza enter Indonesia through particular locations? Did it follow transportation routes? What are the factors with which the spread pattern of influenza was observed across Java, right? Was associated. So I'm going to take that report from Magelang again, and we look at Kabupaten Magelang. And what we see is that the influenza actually enters Magelang from the south, from Yogyakarta. And there are reports that during the pandemic, and this is to go back to a point that I think Rafik Karnsidi made about economic dislocation, there was a lot of economic dislocation in Yogyakarta at the time. And Yogyakarta was a major city. So the pandemic first came to Yogyakarta. Food was very difficult to find. Many people started going up the road from Yogyakarta. You know this road, the road from Yogyakarta to Magelang, Lawat Muntilan. Yeah, I'm sure you are all familiar with this, those of you who live in the area. And people started going up that road looking for food in the different pasars along the road. Unfortunately, they took the influenza virus with them, and that brought the influenza to Kabupaten Magelang. So if you look at the observation of the health officer of Magelang at the time, he very clearly says, with a few exceptions, it appears that the outbreak starts close to the large markets, to the pasars, and develops around them. This is very important. Everyone knows that the markets, which thousands of people visit twice a week, swarming closely together, these are the places where the infection spreads. There could be no better opportunity to allow the infection to spread quickly and effectively. Okay? So here people are already observing the kinds of things that now we are very familiar with, but they're observing it in the 1918 pandemic. And if you look at his report very closely, the report on Magelang, he had actually written week by week what was happening. I took it and converted it into a geographic information system to show you how the influenza progressed through Magelang, from Yogyakarta up through Magelang. Okay, so this is Magelang city. I think most of you are probably familiar with it. This is the road that comes from Jogja. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these maps one after the other, week by week, and you'll see how the influenza, how his report changes from week to week, saying, now it is here, now it is there, now this place has become a big center for the spread of the virus, and now the influenza is everywhere in the region. So on the week of October 11 to 17, he reports that Muntilan and Magelang have some cases of influenza. The next week, some of the villages that are in that area but a little bit away from the road, Mendut, Luar, Kayoran, they start having cases. The following week, when the big circle is colored, it tells you this has become a center of spread. So now Muntilan and Magelang, the first places to be infected, have become centers of spread. Gluar, which also has a pasar, has become a center of spread. And now it is beginning to go down the road to Purwo Rejo as well, as you can see. Yeah. And now I'm just going to page through it. But you know, one of the interesting things here is this is in a historical document. It is in words. But I think you can convert it into a visual that is a very effective way to show people the geography of a pandemic. So in the future weeks, it starts spreading. It starts going into the mountainous areas until the entire Kabupaten of Magelang is affected. Okay. Now, some of you, I'm sure, are interested in tying all of this to policy. So what were some of the policy interventions that the government made in 1918? And there are two relatively important documents. There are many, but these are two that I think are particularly interesting. The first is the Influenza Ordinance. And this was an ordinance that the government passed, unfortunately, long after the pandemic. In 1920 and 21, they were working on it and getting it out. But this was a legal document. It was an ordinance which focused on quarantine. So trying to, if somebody is infected, keeping them away from other people. And the main emphasis of this document is two things: shipping. So they very quickly realized that the influenza was coming into Indonesia on ships, unfortunately too late, but they laid down some very, very stringent regulations on quarantining ships that had infected people, keeping them out of Indonesia. And a second area which may be of particular interest to you, given Margana's presentation, also Rafik Karnsidi's presentation, is the Influenza Ordinance. He actually talks about schools and the regulation of schools and crowding and quarantining in schools to prevent the spreading of pandemic influenza. The other document that is very interesting is a book called Lalara Influenza. This is a play in Javanese. It is written in the Wayang tradition. And what probably happened here is the Dutch health authorities, they said, how do we get education out to the general public in Java about things you should do and things you should not do when there is a pandemic? And my guess is this was a collaboration between the government and probably some Dalang, some members of the Dalang communities, to write a play, Lalara Influenza. And the heroes in the play are actually the Punokawan, whom I'm sure if you're from Java, you are quite familiar with. Maybe if from other islands also, you're probably familiar with the Punokawan. These are the heroes of the play. And this is basically a story about how one of the, I think he's a nephew of one of the Punokawan, actually goes and gets knowledge from Dewa Indra, who is one of the deities in the Wayang tradition. I think it's Dewa Indra, I'll have to go back. And he gets information from him about how to prevent influenza and brings it back to his community in Java and helps them to fight the pandemic. So it's a very interesting educational intervention. It's a booklet. And it ends with a poem, again written in the Javanese style, which actually tells you all the things you should do and all the things you should not do to prevent influenza. Now, of course, today I would not recommend that you use that booklet because you have to understand that the understanding of the Dutch authorities of science in 1918 was very different from our understanding today. So if you are going to look at the booklet, please understand this is not necessarily what you should be telling your students to do in the event of a pandemic. I think we should use 21st century science to think about it. But it is nevertheless a very interesting document. So in terms of geography, we can ask parallel questions for COVID-19. How did it enter Indonesia? From where? Did it follow transportation routes? What are the factors with which the spread pattern of COVID-19 is associated? What measures are being implemented in order to try to reduce the effects of the pandemic? I'll go on to one. Adi, how much time do I have?
10 minutes. Still 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I actually have 4 themes, but I think I'll stop after 3 themes because there will not be time. A third area, some of you probably are interested in sociology. A major branch of sociology is demography. What are some of the demographic features of the 1918 pandemic? And one of the very interesting questions is, what was the impact on specific age groups of people? What was the impact depending on your gender? So these are also questions that I think are of great interest to researchers and probably will be of interest to students as well. And if we know about the impacts on specific age groups and the gender impacts, we can also ask questions about the effects on families, right? Now, you probably all know that COVID-19, the disproportionate impact in terms of severe disease and fatalities was on elderly people 65 years and older. But the very interesting thing about the 1918 influenza, and I'm going to show you some graphs from my home state of Michigan in the United States, is these are distributions of deaths, and you can't see it very clearly, but this is the age of the people who are dying. And what is very interesting about the influenza pandemic is the most severe effect is not on the elderly people. It is on people between the ages of 20 and 40 years. These are young adults, okay? We saw it in 1918, there was a wave. And in my home state of Michigan, there was another wave in 1920, and it's the same graph, right? So people between the ages of 20 and 40 are dying in disproportionate numbers, okay? Now, who are these people? These are young adults. They have children. They are married, okay? They are working. They are farming. They're doing whatever it is to earn the income in the family. This is a very different impact from what we are seeing with COVID-19, which is an elderly population, probably retired, probably grandparents, so very different social implications, probably not working and earning an income for a family anymore, maybe on a pension or something like that, okay? So very different impacts. Let me bring you to Magelang again. The other very interesting difference, at least in Indonesia, was if you look at the percentage of deaths by age, so we'll compare men with women. And what you see is if you look at women between the ages of 20 and 40, the percentage of deaths out of the total number of deaths is much higher than it is for men, okay? So we know two things. Number one, the 1918 flu was disproportionately killing young adults. But in Java, at least in Magelang, it was much more harmful for women than it was for men. And we can ask the question why. There are two different reasons. One may be nutritional status. If there is some gender inequality and men are better fed than women, then that can explain some of this outcome. But probably as important, maybe more important, was what was happening to pregnant women. Okay? Now, we don't have good data for Java, but we have good data from the United States. And one of the things that we see is, so these are data comparing 1920. In 1920, there was a big wave of influenza in the United States, in early 1920. And when that wave happened, there was a jump in deaths from premature birth. So babies are being born prematurely, and a lot of them are weak, so they are not surviving. And here we are comparing 1920 with 1917, that is the dashed line, which is a normal year. So you see a big jump in deaths from premature birth. A second problem you see is stillbirths. So these are babies who are being born dead. This was happening a lot during the pandemic too. A third one, and this is a very big jump, is women were dying in much larger numbers during the process of childbirth. Okay, so these are probably women in between 20 and 40 who are pregnant. They are having babies, and while they are having babies, they are dying much more than you would normally see if you did not have a pandemic, say in a year like 1970. Okay, and then there was a spike in premature births. There was a big jump. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a jump in stillbirths. We saw this in multiple locations in the United States. Okay. And then finally, and this is a very interesting question, I think if you look at the newspapers, people have written about this in Indonesia, they're writing about it in America, they're writing about it all over the world. One of the very interesting things we see is if you look at these graphs, the red line is our calculation of excess deaths. So how many more deaths than usual? And the blue graph is the calculation of excess births. How many more births than usual are you seeing? And what is very interesting, we did this calculation for many states in the US. New York, Pennsylvania, these are all different states in the United States. Massachusetts, Maryland. And in all of them, what we see is there was a big spike in deaths in 1918 in October. And 9 months later, and remember, 9 months is the gestation period for a human baby. There was a big drop in the number of babies who were born. Okay, we saw this in all 4 states that I'm showing you in the graph, as well as in the other 14 states that we studied. Okay, so this is a very interesting demographic phenomenon. When the influenza is really, really bad, right? 9 months later, you're seeing a big drop in the number of births. And the question is why? Is this behavioral? Are people deliberately not being involved in procreation? Or is it biological? When people are ill, is it impossible to conceive a baby? So this is also a very interesting question. This is probably not a question I would teach to young children, but maybe if you're teaching people in sort of high school or beyond, who are interested perhaps in medicine or health, this is another very interesting phenomenon, and it's a mystery. We don't know how much of this is because of health, how much of it is biology, and how much of it is behavior. Okay. So here are some questions you can ask about demography with COVID-19. Has the COVID-19 pandemic affected different demographic groups differently by age, for example? And the answer we know is yes. It has been disproportionately severe with elderly people. What about by gender? We don't really know that very well because we don't have good data for many, many countries. What is the effect of this disproportionate effect on families, right? In 1918, it was parents of children, right? Who were dying, sometimes one, sometimes both. And by the way, this had a major impact on marriages later on. We see some very interesting adjustments. People are remarrying, they're having households with multiple children from previous marriages because they have lost a spouse. Today, we don't see that much because it's affecting elderly people, right? So some very interesting questions here. And then I think, Adi, I've probably run out of time. So I will not talk about the public health lessons from the pandemic. Instead, I'm going to quickly go to my conclusion. Pandemics directly or indirectly affect many aspects of our lives. The 1918 influenza pandemic offers opportunities for students to learn about many of these aspects of our lives. These include history, geography, sociology, public health, and many other subjects. And during the discussion session, I'd be very happy to take questions on this material or on issues relating to education and how it has impacted us and how we are trying to navigate our way through the pandemic. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Pak Siddharth. That's very insightful talks, and we are bombarded by the data or the graph that you have. Actually, I saw that your paper in about 2013. I think it is about 2013, especially to discuss about the Spanish flu in Indonesia. And also the some effect of the how the pasar life, right? And the pasar life, and this is a very, very insightful. And also we can learn from that pandemic and to the this current pandemic. And thank you again. That's very multidisciplinary. That's also in also insightful from the US as well, and we can inspire if the previous speaker Prof Margana give us more the discourse or a model or approaches that to teach our students to create our learning environment, and this is a time to think about this. The lessons that we can include to our lessons, our classroom, the student activities or students' reflection. That's very, very, very important as well. We would like to invite Bu Kirsten, Dr. Kirsten.
Right. Hello, I'm here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Bu Kirsten. Thank you, Bu Kirsten. Let me introduce Bu Kirsten, Dr. Kirsten. Actually, I would like to introduce Pak Siddharth, but when I ask Pak Siddharth, sorry, Pak Siddharth for that. Yeah. Dr. Kirsten she is a researcher at the University of Münster, that cluster excellence of religion and politics, right? And then I know one of Dieter Polak, right? The sociologist, Dieter Polak. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also that's greeting from Yogyakarta, and also I work. I've been in last year, I think, before pandemic. I've been in Münster and with Olaf Muller, Dr. Olaf Muller,
Right.
and then I think I did. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for coming this conference, and we would like to appreciate that Dr. Kirsten, actually the female feminist historian that focuses on women and the women movement in Indonesia, especially in the colonial era. That also this in this conference she will present one of the that's very interesting topic that that's also related to the pandemic 19, and then I saw that some of your reference also from the Pak Sidat as well, and then I saw the from the material. And I would like to invite you. Then the title of the presentation is about from Dukun Bayi, right? From Dukun Bayi into and then health into medical training, because we can see that from Dukun Bayi we are familiar with that. All of us, actually baby boomers generation, I think is quite familiar with Dukun Bayi until 1980s. And yeah, we are happy to invite you to talk about the Dukun Bayi and also medical doctors about the medical training woman in circa 1920s, right? Okay, yeah, thank you. Dr. Kirsten, please, time is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm now just trying to share my screen. Yes, do you all see my presentation?
Yes, so
thank you very much for this warm welcome. First of all, I have to apologize. I had some technical difficulties, and that's why I'm late. So I thank Professor Chandra for taking over, I think, my slot and going first. Thank you very much for that. Can I do a full screen with this? Well, I think I will just keep it like this. I think that works fine. Well, good afternoon for those in Indonesia, and good morning or good evening for those in other time zones. Here in Germany, the sun is just rising. As you already heard before, my name is Kirsten Kamphuis, and I'm a historian of colonial Indonesia, and I specialized, as you've heard, in women's history. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to give this talk. I'm honored to be invited as a speaker at this conference. And as you also already heard, I currently work at Münster University in Germany. And in 2019, I obtained my PhD at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, with a thesis on girls' education in the Dutch East Indies. And as you can see, the title of the talk that I will be giving today is From Dukun Bayi to the First Medical Doctor, Healthcare Training for Women in late colonial Indonesia, so from 1900 to 1942. The organizers of the conference kindly asked me to give a talk about the effects of the Spanish influenza pandemic on, in general, but I'm not such an expert on this pandemic. So I will be speaking about a slightly related topic, namely the implementation of healthcare training for Indonesian women in the late colonial period. And I will start my talk by giving a brief introduction and a hypothesis about the influence of epidemics in general, and the Spanish flu in particular, on the entrance of Indonesian women in the medical profession. I will also provide some historical context. I think you now already have a lot of historical background on pandemics in Indonesia, thanks to the previous talk. And I will also highlight the connection between healthcare, education, and the ethical policy in the Dutch East Indies, followed by an exploration of the developments in women's training as midwives, nurses, and eventually doctors. Finally, in order to make the topic more concrete, I will present a few micro-historical cases, or what I call vignettes, which are fragments of life stories of Indonesian women who worked in healthcare during the colonial time. These show how women were able to make a career for themselves in a colonial and patriarchal context. And perhaps they can serve as an inspiration for us today. So let's start with my introduction. Next slide. I'm sorry, somehow my slide is not changing. Must be doing something wrong. There it goes. Let's start my introduction. And so, as I said before, I haven't worked much on pandemics or epidemics at all, or a little bit on healthcare, but I would like to mention that I have drawn extensively on the work of other historians, especially that of the Dutch historian Lisbeth Hesselink, who has published this book on healthcare development and healthcare training development in the Dutch East Indies. And if you are interested in the topic, I can really recommend the book. It is available in open access through the publisher. I include a link here. There's also this book, Colonial Caring, the History of Colonial and Post-Colonial Nursing, which has a chapter by Hesselink on the early days of nursing in the Dutch East Indies. And then there's this website, historicalhospitals.com, which is a very interesting resource because it's a database of hospitals that were established in the Dutch East Indies. Everything is available online, and in my bibliography later, you also see a lot of useful links that you can maybe use for your own research or your own teaching. So let's first give some historical context. Epidemics and the Spanish influenza. Between the turn of the 20th century and the start of the Pacific War in 1942, several epidemics occurred in colonial Indonesia, and they included malaria, leprosy, beriberi, cholera, smallpox, and even the plague. And in this map, you can see the extent to which the plague affected Java in two waves. First in it's not really clear to see, but there's this light blue color. It shows the regions that were affected by the plague in 1913, 1915, which is really a large swath of Central and West Java. No, East Java, I'm sorry. And then this darker color is 1946, where it was more towards the west of Java. And as you can see in both cases, large regions were affected. In the second wave, the second epidemic was much more contained, however, and perhaps it had to do with healthcare measures that I will speak about further along in this talk. And from all the infectious diseases, if you have heard from Professor Chandra, from all the infectious diseases that Indonesians had to deal with in this period, the Spanish flu was by far the deadliest. And, there were two waves, 1918, 1919, and as you have heard, or as we can read in the article that Professor Chandra just kindly shared, between 4.4 and 4.7 million deaths occurred from the pandemic. And now I come to the importance of pandemics and epidemics for women's integration into the medical profession. Because during epidemics, there was usually a shortage of medical personnel in the affected regions. And this was a worldwide phenomenon during the Spanish influenza. Suddenly, there was much higher need or higher demand for nurses. And this meant that many women, for example, in the United States, this was a clear phenomenon. Many women entered the profession also because this was the time in which there was the first generation of educated women who had the skills to do this. And in Indonesia, we see that during the Spanish influenza, medical students were sent into the overflowing hospitals. And according to one source, every doctor had about 800 students under his care. 800 patients, of course. So it is easy to imagine that hospitals under these circumstances welcomed all staff they could find, including women. And it seems likely that in colonial Indonesia, the medical profession became more accessible for women during the 2 waves of Spanish influenza that Indonesia suffered. While more research is needed before anything can be said about this hypothesis, it is useful to speak a bit more about healthcare training for women in the late colonial era, especially in the context of several epidemics that ravaged Indonesia in the first decades of the 20th century. So now I come to my first part, healthcare, education, and ethical policy. So any developments in public healthcare and education in the late colonial era, my English is really not so good. It's very early for me, so I apologize. Any developments in public healthcare and education in the late colonial era need to be understood in the light of the ethical policy. And before moving on to the specific theme of this lecture, I will therefore refresh your memories a bit on the meaning of the ethical policy in relation to girls' education and healthcare. So the colonial government introduced the ethical policy that can briefly be described as a package of measures intended to improve the economic lives of indigenous people in the Dutch East Indies around 1900. And it is important to know that the colonial government did this at exactly the same time as it was also carrying out massive military expeditions throughout all corners of the archipelago. So I think it's always important not to look only at the time of the ethical policy as a time of welfare measures, but also of bloody military conquest, and really the time in which the colonial state was consolidated with all the suffering that came with that. But the 3 central topics that the ethical policy focused on were education, irrigation, and migration, whereby people from crowded areas of Java were resettled into other regions. In this graph, we can see that the colonial expenditures on education rose. These dots are the education as a percentage of public expenditure. So we said it goes up a bit, especially after the 1920s, but mainly the nominal expenditure and the real expenditure rose after started rising up from about 1905 onwards. And the government introduced several types of schools for Indonesian children and started giving subsidies to schools that were ran by Christian missions and some Muslim and Indonesian organizations. As we can see on those maps, come on maps. Yes, as we can see on this map, the proportion of all children in schools, however, remained quite low. In this map, you can see that, for example, in Jakarta, 9% of all Indonesian children were in primary school by 1935. So it's really towards the end of Dutch colonial rule. Numbers are higher in places like the Moluccas, in Manado, which I think because of the role of the Protestant mission played there. Also in West Sumatra, it's pretty high because of traditions in Islamic education. But in general, you can say that the biggest part of children never went to school. And the same goes for girls, even more extreme. This is the proportion of girls in schools. And we see that in Jakarta, 4% of all girls went to school. So it's a very low number. And it goes, above, the highest here is 14% in Manado, which is still not very high. So these maps also refer to primary schools. So that means that only a very small Indonesian elite ever received secondary training. So the women that we'll speak about who managed to become nurses and midwives, they were certainly very privileged. So an expansion in the healthcare system was also part of the ethical policy. The government established a civil medical service, which, among others, administered smallpox vaccination and started hygiene campaigns, such as latrines, or sort of toilet building in villages. But in the end, it was also always the people in the village themselves who had to build these. these latrines, but still. We can see that these measures helped contain the spread of the plague of the 1946 epidemic, as we saw on the previous map in Java. For those who would like to know more about the government measures against the plague, it might be interesting to look at this clip. It's called "The Pest op Java" or "The Plague on Java," and it's let me start it. I hope it works. Yeah, so it's a silent film, and it shows many examples of the ways in which village housing could be improved to prevent spreading of the disease. You see, it's in Dutch and Malay. And houses were, for example, adjusted so that pest-carrying rats could find less space to build nests. For example, in hollow bamboo poles. You can see in the clip that rats were often building nests in the hollow bamboo poles, but also inside the beds that people slept on, which of course means that people could get bitten by the fleas easily. People were also encouraged to regularly search for rats and air out their furniture. You can see that in this bit. Yeah, here. So people were told, take out your furniture from your house, air it out, search for rats and kill them to make sure that there was less occasion for the plague to be transmitted. And this is a very long clip, actually. It's more than an hour, I think. Yeah, and it's available on YouTube through the Dutch Film Museum, So, and there's also more clips on healthcare online on YouTube and easy to access. So this might be interesting also to show your students because it really gives a very lively image, I think. Training of medical staff was also the responsibility of the civil medical service, and a school for Indonesian doctors was opened in Jakarta in 1902, but it remained closed to women for the first 10 years, and I'll come back to that later in my talk. Some of you might recognize this building from Jakarta. It's now the Fakultas Kedokteran of the Universitas Indonesia, but in the colonial time it was the Stovia, de school tot opleiding van inlandse artsen, so the school for training of indigenous doctors. And this is something that Professor Chandra also already mentioned, this Lilaria influenza. So this was, conscience-raising material. This was also the work of the civil medical service. We must, however, be careful not to overestimate the expenditures that the government made for healthcare provision. The government budget from this time shows that the money that the colonial government spent on education and healthcare was still very minimal if you compare it to its expenses on construction projects and the civil service, for example. And hospitals and clinics were often racially segregated, which meant there were separate wards for Europeans and people classified as native or inlands, as was said in Dutch then. And it's crucial to recognize also that not only Dutch colonial officials argued for better access to healthcare and education during the years of the ethical policy. So this was definitely not all the work of the government, even though they had, of course, the biggest budget. But apart from the public healthcare services, organizations such as, for example, the Muhammadiyah and Christian organizations also ran hospitals. And these would in fact prove very important to the training of the first generation of Indonesian nurses. So then I come to my second part, women as healthcare workers. Javanese Priyayi women, who were among the first Indonesian women, as you maybe all know, to receive rest-of-style education, were an important voice in public debates about healthcare and education at the time. This, of course, included the very famous Raden Ajin Kartini, but she certainly was not the only one. In 1914, the government published a multi-volume report on the well-being of the population of Java and Madura, the so-called mindere welvaartsrapporten or lesser welfare reports. And several women gave their opinions in the section on women's position in Javanese society. And one of them was Raden Ayu Sostro Hadikusumo, we see in this picture with her husband. And she was previously named Sumatri, and she was a sister of Kartini. And here we see, I like this picture because it shows really how she and her husband tried to portray a very modern marriage. They were in the same position. They were equals. And she was an educated woman, and she argued for the establishment of a midwifery school for girls, and also expressed the belief that it was important to teach girls about basic hygiene and basic healthcare at school. There was also one non-Pejai woman who was featured in the report that I mentioned. Her name was Charissa, and she was a midwife in Bandung. And she proposed to start up midwifery courses in the villages so that less women would die during childbirth. Of course, death during childbirth was a huge problem at the time.
Gimana Pak
also,
pertanyaan?
Yeah? What? Oh, okay, sorry. It was a huge problem at the time. Kartini also died during childbirth. So, indeed, midwifery was the first medical occupation for women that underwent professionalization in the colonial era, even before the ethical policy was introduced. So, in this picture, we see an Indonesian midwife with her trainees taking care of a woman who is maybe in labor. And this is a type of baby healthcare and mother healthcare that the colonial officials approved of, as it was seen as modern and hygienic. Such practices, however, faced strong competition from more traditional approaches to healthcare for babies and mothers. Such healthcare practices took shape long before colonization, and many of such traditions continue until today. And a good example are the Dukun Bayi, birth attendants who specialized in taking care of mothers and children before, during, and after birth. Colonial officials were often very negative about the skills of Dukun Bayi, dismissing them as unhygienic and ignorant. One Dutch physician who interviewed Dukun Bayi in Kediri even called them angels of death because he believed they did more bad than good. But from the fact that Dukun Bayi still play an important role in some communities in Indonesia nowadays, it is clear that traditional care was highly appreciated by local people. And it is likely that the prejudices of Dutch colonizers towards the Dukun Bayi were for a large part determined by sexism, racism, and colonial discourses that dismissed indigenous healthcare workers and healthcare practices as primitive or uncivilized. Moreover, in the Netherlands as well, doctors generally had a low opinion of midwives, first because they were women, and second because they often had little official training. So in general, the goal of healthcare officials was to replace the Dukun Bayi with midwives who were trained in Western medicine. To this end, the government opened a midwifery course for Indonesian women in Jakarta as early as 1850. So it's really very early, next to the Dr. Jawa school, where men were trained as doctors. But because the general population still preferred the help of a traditional birth attendant, the school was closed again in 1875, so 25 years. And in those 25 years, about 100 women had received a diploma. So it was really not a success. People refused to be taken care of by the trainees, by the graduates from the school, also because they were young, and they said they believed that it was much better to have an old woman or an elderly woman as a birth attendant. So it was only later that Indonesian women could train as midwives again at local missionary and public hospitals. So the situation in nursing was a bit different. In contrast to the situation in the Netherlands, nursing in the Dutch East Indies was initially not seen as a female profession. Perhaps because of racial hierarchies between staff and doctors, but also because it gave status. It was a mantri rank, which meant that it was official government rank to be a nurse, and this gave some status to male nurses as well. As more Indonesian women gained access to education in the Dutch East Indies, and Dutch ideas about gender and professionalism gained ground, it seems that the profession became increasingly acceptable for women. Male and female nurses usually had different tasks. We can see this also in this picture, which is clearly a stage picture, but we see men and women holding different tools. Women took care of these patients under supervision of a doctor, while men often carried out the more technical tasks and worked more independently. So at first, hospitals and clinics recruited nurses in the Netherlands, but their numbers always remained low. The first initiatives in professional training for nurses in the Dutch East Indies occurred at the initiative of individual hospitals, especially those established by the Protestant mission around 1900. One important example was the Petronella Hospital in Jakarta, actually, where initially domestic servants and gardeners were even trained as nurses. Later, the hospital issued a medical handbook in Javanese for its nursing students. And those of you who live in Jakarta will now know the Petronella Hospital as the Rumah Sakit Bethesda. I think the building is still the same, partly. Another prestigious hospital where nurses were trained was established by the Protestant mission in Mojowarno in East Java. And here's a picture. We can see the doctor, the head doctor, Dr. Barevoots, and his wife, Dr. Barevoots van Eyck, and she trained nurses and midwives herself. The midwifery training program had a very good reputation, and even Karnsidi wrote letters with Dr. Barevoots and even considered taking the course for some time. In 1915, the government introduced a diploma in sec nursing, so it's possible that these young women later, once this was introduced, well, 20 years later, maybe not then, but next generations of nurses would have gotten an official diploma in nursing. And apart from race and gender, class also played a large role in healthcare facilities. The Mojowarno Hospital, for example, had a separate ward, so a separate room for Prijayi patients. So they would not have to be in touch with with people of non-noble class. Many nurses themselves also came from Prijayi circles, and to assure the profession would acquire status among local people, training programs tried to attract students of noble birth. But because a primary school certificate was required for student nurses, most of them came from well-off families as well, because you had to have a primary school certificate, which meant that they were elite women to start with, elite girls. So now I arrive at the third part of my talk, which is my personal favorite, and they are fragments of the lives of pioneering Indonesian women who were healthcare workers. So there's no systematic analysis of women working as nurses in colonial Indonesia. And I will therefore share with you some vignettes or micro-historical small stories of individual women who chose that profession. For the first example, I would stay in Mojowarno, at the hospital I was just talking about. While looking for pictures of the hospital, I encountered this picture of a woman called Jasni, who was the most experienced midwife working there. The picture was most likely taken in 1933, and according to the photo caption, portrays Jasni in front of her own house that she built with the money she earned working as a midwife. I would actually love to go to Mojowarno and see if the house is still there. It would be amazing. She was trained by Dr. Barevoots, so the doctor we saw in the previous picture. And she has passed her examination in 1902 as a member of the second group to have been trained at the hospital. At the time when the picture was taken, she had been a midwife for 31 years. And she had carried out more than 1,500 deliveries. I love this picture because it shows how women like Jasni were able to gain financial independence as healthcare workers. She appears to have been a true family woman as well. She had 3 children and 5 grandchildren, and it's possible that there she's holding her little grandchild. The second life story that I would like to tell you is one that I encountered years ago in the missionary archive in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And I was leafing through the pages of the Nederlands Zendingsblad, or the Dutch Missionary Magazine, a magazine of the United Protestant Mission in the Netherlands, when I found this picture. And it portrays Marianne Wenas Wajong, taken around 1921. Marianne Wenas Wajong was a Minahassan woman who worked as a nurse in a Protestant hospital in Sonder, a town in Minahasa, so North Sulawesi. The magazine published an article about her at the occasion of her 12.5 years anniversary working as a nurse, which meant that she had been working at the hospital from around 1908 or 1907. She would thus also have been at work during the Spanish influenza pandemic. Prior to her training as a nurse, she had received her primary education at an elite Christian girls' school in the village of Tomohon, and therefore it is likely that she came from a well-off family. Possibly she was the daughter of a village head or another official. Apart from her work in the hospital, Marianne also regularly went into the villages to take care of sick people, or she went to check up on women who were pregnant or who had already given birth. The writer of the article praised her for her humbleness and charity, which were characteristics that the Christian missionaries specifically associated with women. And what I find particularly interesting is that Marianne was most likely a married woman. You see she has a double last name, which is common in the Netherlands, or also under Dutch law, Christian law, or let's say in Christian communities was common for married women to have their own last name and their husband's last name. So in the Netherlands at the time, it was highly unusual that women who were married continued their career. Women were usually fired from their jobs when they married. So I would therefore say that Marianne Winnes Wajong, if she indeed was a working woman who was also married, was a pioneer in more than one sense. So for the third and final vignette that I'll be presenting, we see Marie Thomas. We're staying in Minahasa, where Marie Thomas was born in 1896. Perhaps some of you know her name because she was the first Indonesian woman to obtain the medical degree to become a doctor, and therefore she has some fame. As the daughter of a soldier in the colonial army, she did not come from a particularly privileged background. So when the Stovia, the medical school that I showed before, was open to girls in 1912, she was able to enter thanks to a study fund, because the education was actually free for men, but women had to pay a fee. And so she was able to get a scholarship. And after graduating, she specialized in gynecology, working in hospitals in Batavia, Medan, and Manado. She married a Minangkabau man, who was also a doctor, a Muslim man, which was, of course, quite controversial. She was a Christian woman marrying a Muslim man. Together they moved to Padang, and Marie continued working in government service. And she actually also became politically active in the Minahasan political party, Persatuan Minahasa. After the Indonesian Revolution, she established a midwifery school in Bukit Tinggi and opened the way for a new generation of Indonesian women to enter the medical profession in the Republic of Indonesia. And recently, Google honored her with a doodle, so a little cartoon, which you see here, on her birthday. So I now open the page where I have my bibliography, so you can look at the articles and sources that I used. Many of them are available online, so please take a look at them if you want to. There's also many pictures. The KTLV image collection and the collection of the Museum of the Tropics in the Netherlands have amazing photography collections that I think will be of interest to you. So as my conclusion, I would just like to stress that there are so many life stories of pioneering women to tell. And I believe it is especially important to focus on the everyday experiences of ordinary women, or even though they are privileged, but ordinary women working as nurses or midwives. There is little work on healthcare in colonial Indonesia, and sometimes scholars do not work with the category of gender at all. Recent historical work has focused, for example, on the role of doctors in the Indonesian nationalist movement. While such histories are important to tell, I also think that historical attention is due to the first Indonesian women who were healthcare workers at a time when girls' education was not the norm. And this can help historians to shift the focus away from well-known names and nationalist figures, as is often the case. So, of course, in Indonesian historiography, in many historiographies, people tend to focus on big names, right? The big nationalists. And I think it's interesting to shift the focus away from these men and look at other people sometimes, because they also give a lot of insight. So lastly, a final word on the hypothesis from the beginning. It is imaginable the Spanish influenza pandemic made it more acceptable for Indonesian women to work in healthcare. Much more work needs to be done, however, before anything can be said with certainty. And I believe there may be a task for young Indonesian historians, maybe one of us who is among the audience today can take up that task. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I would really love, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. If there's anything else you would like to share, to discuss with me or share, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me through email or over Twitter. You can find me, this is my email address. You can find me on Twitter as well. I would love to get in touch. So thank you very much.
Danke schön, Dr. Kirsten. Yeah, okay. The prima, that's very, very, very interesting. And prima. I got some. It's quite surprising that when you show us the maps in the proportion of the college, the education, right? And then we can see that the not Celebes, not Celebes or not Sulawesi, and Moluccas, and also Papua, that they have the higher rate of education participation, even among girls, that in Indonesia. But except in Sumatra, with West Sumatra, I think it's quite prominent that they have quite a long history of the successful in education. But it is quite surprising for me, especially because it's quite from at that time 1930 something, and we have got higher level education at the Eastern Indonesia. I think related to Prof. Rafik and the keynote speaker and the keynote speech, and actually we have a history, we have a strong history in the Eastern Indonesia that at that time we can do, but now actually we can do as well. That's the points that I can learn. Also, this quite interesting as well, if we can, because mostly the participants who come from the education background, it can inspire us about how we can adopt this study, actually not in health education only, but we can do more intensively, for example, and the teacher, women teacher, for example. That's also next research agenda that will be fruitful and fascinating. Thank you. Again, danke schön, Dr. Kirsten, and then with this very, very inspiring talk. We will move to the question and answer. We have, this is a question for, let me check the all question. The first question comes from Diana. This is a question for Pak Siddharth, that related to pandemic 1918, the past. Could you give some suggestions or lessons for Indonesian to face this current pandemic, especially in social science? And she emphasized on how to include health issues in history education curriculum. And the second one, what's your idea about the being dealt with the normally like influenza in 1918? Yeah, I think these first two questions for Pak Siddharth. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Yeah.
These are really wonderful questions.
Yeah.
What I really think is necessary is, there's a fundamental concept in the discipline of epidemiology. Now, epidemiology is the study of disease and epidemics, And it obviously, epidemics have a social component and a biological component. So there are many different components. But one thing that I'm noticing is in schools in America and in Indonesia and around the world, students don't have even one lesson in epidemiology, right? And so one of the things I would very strongly recommend, and I think going through the pandemic last year and this year has really underscored it, is that teachers talk about a very specific way about thinking about infectious disease epidemiology. And if you'll give me the liberty to do it, this was actually the fourth module I was going to present as public health, right? What are the things we can do in the classroom vis-a-vis public health? So this is what I was talking about. The way epidemiologists think about an infectious disease, including a pandemic, the most common models are what we call compartmental models, right? And a compartmental model is basically a model in which you take people, you take the population, and you put people into different compartments, okay? So the simplest compartmental model is something called the SIR or the SIR model, and it consists of 3 compartments. So you put people into either a susceptible compartment or an infectious compartment or a removed compartment. Let me explain that if you'll give me the liberty to, because this is a really important concept. So when a virus like the COVID, the SARS coronavirus 2 virus, the SARS coronavirus 2 virus hits a population, it is a novel virus. It is a new virus. Our bodies have no experience with fighting the virus, right? So when that virus emerges in a population, at the beginning of the epidemic, everybody is in the susceptible compartment. The whole population is susceptible. They are in danger of getting infected, right? Over time, what happens is some of those people become exposed and some of them become infected and infectious, right? So we move those people into the second compartment, the infectious compartment. And then they have the infection, they infect more susceptible people, and then at some point, they either recover or they are removed, right? So they recover and they have some immunity, or unfortunately, in some instances, they die, right? So the simplest way about thinking about infectious disease epidemics is this compartmental model, right? Why is it an important framework? It is an important framework for thinking about a disease because, and it's also very simple, because in 1918, if you wanted to move from the susceptible compartment to the recovered compartment so that you were immune, the only way to do it was by getting infected, right? In today's world, there is another way to move from susceptible to recovered or removed, right? And that is by getting a vaccine, right? So a very important thing for understanding the pandemic is to try to understand how many people in the population remain susceptible, okay? Unfortunately, in Indonesia, because the rate of vaccination has been relatively low, right? There are not that many people who are immunized against the infection, okay? Many people got ill during the wave that is coming down right now, thankfully. So those people also, presumably, if they were infected, they have some immunity, right? But my calculation is that is still not even close to the entire population of Indonesia. And what this means is Indonesia still has tens of millions of people who are susceptible to catching COVID-19. Okay? And what this means is if the virus gets out again, there is a danger that there will be another wave of infection in Indonesia. Right? So I think it is very important for the public to understand this basic structure of how epidemics work, right? The virus doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have a mind, it's a machine. Its job is to enter your body, to replicate, and then to jump to somebody else, right? So I think we need to understand that this is how epidemics work. These are the basic building blocks. And if you want to try to prevent the epidemic from flaring up, how do you break this arrow? How do you enhance this arrow? How do you get susceptible people to being removed so that they are not susceptible anymore without them getting infected? Right? So that's if there was one lesson I would introduce into schools all over the world, It is an understanding of how these epidemics work. And if you understand these building blocks, you can start thinking about the future, taking measures to prevent epidemics. Now, these models can be developed. You can add a compartment in the middle called an exposed compartment. So over here, between being susceptible and infected, right, you can have an exposed compartment. Right? So you're susceptible, somebody coughs on you who has the virus, now you're exposed. Now do you become infectious or not? It depends on how much of the virus you got, how strong your body is, all kinds of other conditions. So there are more complicated models. There's another one with quarantine. If we take all the susceptible people in the population and quarantine them, no problem. Nobody's going to get exposed. Nobody's going to get infectious. The problem is it comes at an economic cost, right? So I think if you can explain to young people, and maybe in high school or middle school, right, how these models work and what it means for reality, you will be doing a huge service to Indonesia. I think schools around the world will be doing a huge service to their populations. Thank you.
Thank you for the, I think the second question, Prof. Pak Sidat, COVID-19 being dealt with the normally like influenza 1918. The second question.
So, you know, when the COVID-19 pandemic started in 2020, I'd been doing research on the 1918 influenza for a decade, for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And my first thought was, I'm living my research. This is crazy, you know? And the problem is, when the COVID-19, when the SARS coronavirus 2 hit the global population, in the beginning, we were in the same situation as we were in 1918, okay? We had no immunity to the virus. We did not have a vaccine, right? There was only one way to deal with the virus, and that was to quarantine to prevent its spread. And this was the situation in which people found themselves in 1918. They had no cure for influenza. The only way to deal with it was to stay away from people who had influenza, right? So for the first many months, my sense was we were in a very similar situation. Now, we did put out an article, and I'll actually share it in the chat room. There were many reasons, even at that time, to be optimistic about the SARS, about COVID-19. Here are some of the reasons. We knew that at some point we would develop a vaccine, right? This was way back in March 2020. We said, look, we're going to get a vaccine at some point. And sure enough, by the end of the year, we had a vaccine, right? Now that completely changes the game. Because if you vaccinate people, you no longer need to shut down the economy entirely if you vaccinate enough people. A second benefit of living in the 21st century is, in a lot of the world, we are much better, our nutrition is much better than it was in 1980, okay? You look at Indonesia, you look at India where I was born and I grew up, right? These were very poor countries in 1918. There is still poverty, but much less. Many of our populations are better fed, so that is a plus. Number three, we know what causes COVID-19. We know the virus. Within a few weeks, you could actually see images of the virus, right? And you had an idea about how to deal with them. So that was another plus. The other huge benefit of the 21st century is communication, okay? We have over 7 billion people around the world, and we're all connected, you know? We're talking to each other 12 hours away in terms of time, you know, over Zoom. So if you learn something about influenza, about COVID-19 in Indonesia, about how to deal with it, you can very quickly share that research with people all over the world. So we can learn from best practices instantaneously. And that, I think, has been a huge benefit in managing the pandemic in the 21st century. So these are some reasons why I think that we are much better off today than we were in 1918, even though at the beginning, it was a difficult situation because we were helpless. We didn't have a vaccine. This was a respiratory virus just like influenza, and it had approximately the same case fatality rate. Roughly between 1% and 3% of people who were getting ill were dying from it, just like the 1918 influenza. So thank you. That's a great question.
Thank you, Pak Sidat. Yeah. And we move to the third question. I think the de Fragments, I think for Dr. Kamfis or Dr. Kirsten, from Pak Yudi Prastyo, where there are also from the Australian woman who studied medical studies, and particularly the Chinese, among the Chinese ones. Additionally, you mentioned that male can obtain medical study with free of charge, while indigenous women had to pay the tuition fee. What consideration would make that policy? Yeah. Please.
Thank you.
Dr. Kirsten, yeah.
Yes, thank you for these questions. And I'm so impressed. People are speaking German and Dutch to me here. It's really impressive. Were there vreemde Oosterling women? So maybe I have to explain vreemde Oosterling. It sort of translates to foreign Orientals. It was medical. It was a legal category actually for people who were not classified as Europeans or as Indonesians, as natives. There were mainly Chinese people who were in this category. And I have to say that in my work, I have not yet encountered a Chinese woman who studied medicine, but I'm sure they were because the educational, sort of the percentage of women, of girls who received an education in Chinese circles was relatively high. Many of them were also in missionary schools, particularly Protestant and Catholic missionary schools. So I do think that it would have been very likely for Chinese women to start studying that. I will have to see if I can find any specific examples. Actually, the first two women who graduated in medical school were Marie Thomas and Anna Wora, who was another Minahassan woman. So you can see, so you can really see that the Minahasa is very prevalent here, but they had a high tradition, they had a long tradition in women's education, and Chinese also did that, had to some extent. So yeah, the question has to remain open, but I think it's definitely very likely. Why can boys or young men study medicine, medical study for free, and women had to pay tuition fee? I do not know. The colonial government was incredibly stingy. Like anything that costs money, they sort of ran away screaming at the prospect of having to pay anything. So the idea, I think that they just didn't see the need for women to study medicine. They also maybe thought the money they would invest in these women was waste of money because they assumed that women would stop working after marriage. I think that their reasoning was we need male doctors, but we don't really need female doctors. So if they really want to study, they can pay it themselves. And it was actually lucky for for Marie Thomas that she could obtain a scholarship. This scholarship was actually established by Charlotte Jacobs, who was a pharmacist, who had a pharmacy in Batavia, and she was the sister of Aletta Jacobs, who was the first woman in the Netherlands to go to university at all, who was also a medical doctor and a gynecologist. So we see here how there is a sort of transnational women's activism going on, which helped women go to medical school. Yeah. So I have to sort of, this also has to remain open, but I hope I have given a little bit of an indication.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. I think at the same time, I think Pak Sidar also share some material, some. Okay. I would like to ask personally that because that's based on my that surprising fact that you have presented about the education progress on education achievement for Eastern Indonesia. Could you tell us about that why it is about the Moluccas effect, about the Spanish or Portuguese effect, or what's effect, and why it's quite after that to stop that development? Yeah, thank you.
So the question is why the percentage of women going to school there was higher?
Yeah, it's quite, it's right. Higher, even higher in compared to other parts of Indonesia.
Right. That's because of the mission. So there were many Protestant missionaries in these areas. And they established many schools. So, and they were also free of charge. So that's the reason. If we see, for example, a place like Flores, the island of Flores in NTT, we see that the Catholic mission there opened many schools. So we see that the places where Christian missions were very active, which were the non-Muslim areas of Indonesia, so not so much in Java. We see that the percentage of women going to school, girls going to school, is much higher, because the mission was very adamant that everybody should go to school so they could hear about the religion.
Okay.
So that is why it stopped later. I think it's just because the missionaries left, or the mission lost its influence after independence, and then the government had to take over, and there were problems with implementation there.
Okay, but after that is stopped at some point, at some time. For example, what time that development terminated? Yeah. And I think in which year after that they decrease quite significantly. Do you have any any facts about that? Or
which year?
Which year they actually compared to Western Indonesia, the Western Indonesia part, and then they increase in education, and in which year I think the change this pattern from, I think they not becoming more dominant or good in education achievement later, and then
it's hard to say. It would be difficult for me to give an estimation of that.
Okay.
I don't know the mission. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. No problem. Yeah. Yeah. We are still waiting for the question from the participants, and I think during this, I think when you wrote about the history of healthcare healthcare training among women, and during your presentation, I was thinking about the how about the women teachers? Yeah, women teachers. It's not girls' education, but women teachers. Do you have any? I think some of your paper or insight about that. Thank you.
Yes. So actually, teaching was one of the first professions that opened up to women in many places of the world, also in Indonesia. So what we see is that the government, for example, started in 1916, I think, 2 schools. The first teacher training schools, especially for girls, for young women. One was in Jakarta, the other one was in Padang, if I'm not mistaken. And there were many women who actually started working as teachers at that time in different sort of schools. It was also around 1925 that the government started opening schools, especially for girls. There were many parents who preferred sending their girls to all-girls schools, especially when they were from the age of 10, 12 onwards. They thought, okay, we can't have them in the same room with so many boys anymore. We have to have them in girls' schools, and also have them taught by female teachers. So there was a big demand for female teachers, definitely. What else can I say about it? There were also Indonesian women who trained as teachers in the Netherlands. The wife of Ki Hajar Dewantoro, what's her name? Sutartina Sazoningrat, I think.
Yeah.
I think she moved. She was a teacher. She trained in Den Haag alongside her husband. So there were definitely such stories. And I hope I'm working on a book now on girls' education in the Dutch East Indies, and I hope to have a whole chapter on teacher training. So and also, apart from the government, there were many Indonesian initiatives too. There is in West Sumatra, there were many girls going to school, and there's the Dinya Putri, which was the first big Muslim boarding school for girls. They also established their teacher training program. So there's definitely much to say about that.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Okay. That there is a question. Let me. Yeah, this is wait. Okay, Prof. Margana. This is for Professor Margana that bagaimanakah konsep pengembangan MBKM Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka in order to untuk mewujudkan untuk implement karakter kebangsaan, nation character building, and also nation building, and how about apakah pengembangan MBKM di UNY bisa monggo Pak.
Thank you very much for having wonderful questions dealing with freedom of learning, as mentioned in my presentation. Freedom of learning is the big issue, or becomes the big issue in Indonesia, particularly to empower the students. After they are powerful, they are able to empower the society, but they have to be responsibility in reference to the empowerment of him or herself, and then they are able to empower the society. That is why freedom of learning, as implemented in Jakarta State University and other universities, it is possible to collaborate across universities. Take, for example, Jakarta State University has collaboration with other universities, private universities or state universities in Indonesia. Even we also have a collaboration across universities from abroad. Take, for example, Malaysia and other universities in other countries. Added to this, we believe that the implementation of freedom of learning via Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka could drive the students' nationality. Why? Because they can exchange their experience, their insights, their cultural issues from one regions to the other regions. Take, for example, from west of Sumatra and Indonesia and Jakarta, so they could establish what we call cultural awareness, intercultural awareness, because having sensitivity of culture or cultural sensitivity could establish the relation across nations, across humans, so that they could minimize the conflicts, horizontal conflict among the nations as well as the students and society in Indonesia. And then, as mentioned earlier, the essence of education is not only concerned with transfer of knowledge, but we also accentuate on the transfer of values or characters, because characters should become our job, national job to establish, in order that the students are not only concerned with hard skill, but they also have soft skills, one of which is characters, the characters issues or values issues, so that they could establish themselves, empower themselves to be agile people, as mentioned earlier. We, State University of Jakarta, apply some programs. Take, for example, Kampus Mengajar, and then we also have credential, micro credential, and then transfer credit, Permata Sakti, and the like. So those programs, as initiated by the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology, could drive the students to open their mind. It's not only concerned with their own regions, but the understanding of culture across nations, across regions, will make them be agile, to be agile people. I think that's all, Mr. Moderator, Pak Adi Cile, PhD. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Margana, with the this to guide us to give insight for the how to implement our nation building lessons in our. I think actually I have I've got insight from the presentation, but your presentation. But the we have three different distinguished speakers, and then three different topics, ranging from the contemporary and contemporary education approaches and how about the Spanish influenza pandemics in the past, and also about the healthcare of women training. I think thank you very much of all speakers that give us the very nice contribution for this conference, and then give us some important lessons. And before we finish, let me resume some points that we can take the message to our home, and then to our conference, in today's conference, and actually the parallel session. The first one is about the from the keynote speaker. We learn about the how policy that will be done by government, ranging from the how to increase human development index, and also how to tackle some problem from the childhood problem, like the most popular one is about stunting. Yeah, what's about stunting, and also the second one, the importance of the application of heutagogy, and also some approach in education that can be applied in our university. And the important, that's the third one, about the importance of interdisciplinary approach in understanding this pandemic, it's Spanish flu, and that the same way that we can learn from the Spanish flu in 1918, and we can adopt some points, and then we can learn from that influenza Spanish flu to tackle today's pandemic or this current pandemic. And the third one is about the emphasis about the how women in healthcare, actually they have important contribution as well, and we can learn from that particular issue, and we can have some ideas and inspiration with for example, this is for education, especially for education training, and we can have some insightful practices and also application. Prof. Siddharth, Pak Siddharth, do you want to, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Pa Adi. I just wanted to mention something in connection with what Pa Margana said. One of the things that the pandemic has done is it has forced us to rethink education, as I think he very eloquently put it in his presentation. And I wanted to give a specific example of one of the happier developments. I think we've all discovered Zoom partly because of the pandemic. And my engagement with Indonesia was a lot less frequent prior to the pandemic than it has become as a result of the pandemic, because now Zoom is normal. And all my friends in Indonesia are essentially one Zoom call away, right? Earlier, you used to send emails, wait for a reply. Maybe you had to fly to Indonesia, they had to fly here. But in connection with this, let me draw a line to education. Until March, I was the president of the American Institute for Indonesian Studies, and now I'm the past president. And one of the things we did is we started a conference. It's called the APHIS MSU Conference. This was a conference for researchers from Indonesia and the United States. We had initially envisioned it as that kind of conference. It was to bring together scholars. When you have a conference in Indonesia, you don't see many people from, the US or Europe attending because the airfare, it's so expensive, right? And when you have a conference in America, there are very few Indonesians. So, the level of engagement in the past between Indonesian scholars and scholars from other countries has been relatively low because of this imbalance and how expensive it is to cross borders. What we did is when we held this conference, there were two enormous benefits. Number one, the cost of holding a virtual conference is very low. You don't have to book a hotel. You don't have to fly people. People can sit at home and do their presentations. And so we were able to charge a very low fee, and we were very pleasantly surprised. We were expecting maybe 100 people will come for the conference. 500 people showed up. Half of them were professors and PhD students from Indonesia. Half of them were from 20 other countries around the world. And for the first time in my life, I was in a conference on Indonesian studies where there was a balance between Indonesian scholars and non-Indonesian scholars. And more importantly, a lot of the Indonesians who attended the conference were young scholars, right? And these are usually the scholars who have the smallest budgets. And for them, it's the most difficult. Okay. So I would urge everybody in this room to think about, ways in which we can use this technology. Yes, it's not perfect for pedagogy. I think we all recognize that. But it is a very powerful way to bring people together. For younger people whose budgets may not be big, to have their voices heard, to develop international collaboration so we can co-publish our research. I think this is a priority in Indonesia as much as it's a priority outside. So if we can think about ways to bring scholars together and do this more, I think we can really intensify the pace at which we produce knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good points, Pak Siddharth, and then thank you for give some these thoughts. And I think I will invite Prof. Margana and also Dr. Kirsten to give the final remark.
Honestly or frankly speaking, it's a wonderful international conference. As the first international conference, we could attract some participants, a great number of participants that consists around 300. So it is a good place for us to share ideas, experience, insight, because sharing becomes our soul to establish our nation, our world. That is why exchanging or sharing ideas, information will be making us to be qualified, professional, and agile people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Margana. So, Dr. Kirsten?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's, I have to say that for me too, Zoom has been an opportunity to connect more with Indonesia. I was present at the IFIS conference. It was a wonderful occasion. I really enjoyed it. So I hope that it will continue to next year, and then hopefully, many of you also apply. I want to thank you again for being invited. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed seeing your faces. It's a sad thing for me that I can't come to Indonesia now or in the near future, and this is a great way to feel closer to everyone. So it's been a pleasure, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for the all speakers and distinguished speakers, and thank you. We are at the we are scheduled. Should be finished. At the 12:20, then this is a 12:19. That's 1 minute left, and also this is I think we will pass on the MC after this, and I would like to say thank you very much indeed for distinguished speakers and all participants, and for this wonderful conference. And let me say that very apologize for this if it inconvenience during this time during guiding this discussion. And I would like to say the final points and from the minister, the Prof. Rafik, until the all different all speakers, that we can get some benefits from this pandemic. If we can easily doing this conference, and let me close with this statement, and with every difficulty there is a relief. Thank you very much indeed. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Siddhartha Chandra and Ms.
Terima kasih Pak Siddharth. Pak.
Yeah.
Terima kasih beribuan, terima kasih.
Ya, terima kasih sekali. Thank you.
Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih Bu Kirsten. Ya, dinanti ke Indonesia, ke Jogja, Pak.
Yeah, we are looking forward to seeing you.
Semoga.
Yeah, in Jakarta. We are looking forward to seeing you in Jakarta. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Terima kasih.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So let us give a big applause to the presenter.
Big applause, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, now is the photo session. Please set your camera on, and the host will help you to screenshot. Okay.
Satu, dua, tiga. Mohon di
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the plenary session. Please be well informed that the parallel session will head after this session at 1:30 p.m. via Zoom. The host will assign presenter to join breakout room, and the participant also can join the breakout room by giving number in front of your name, 1 until 7. And the conference certificate for participant will be sent via email. Finally, we would like to thank you for your participation and attention Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Mohon perhatian Bapak Ibu.
Tadi aku bilang. Atau aku yang bilang aja?
Ya, aku tak mundur. Gini aja di sini.
Namanya apa? Namanya diganti nggak?
Terima kasih. Nggak ada pengumuman mungkin ya? Ya.
Untuk presenter, mohon dipastikan untuk mengganti nama atau menambahkan nama di depan nama dengan menambahkan nomor sesuai dengan ruangan. Kemudian presenter diminta untuk hadir 15 menit sebelum acara dimulai. Please make sure that your name be renamed as the number in front of your name. Please be ready 15 minutes before the event begins. Thank you.
Siap.
Dan partisipan boleh bergabung dengan room dari 1 sampai 7. And the participant can join breakout room from 1 to 7. Thank you.
Ini udah ya, tutup ya ini. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Gitu.